we there yet?
We get there when we get there.
I'm a dad, baby.
As dads, we're often called upon to explain certain situations that are, in a lot of ways, inexplicable. We find ourselves in that situation currently with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the Middle East. It's been going on a while. It's flared up recently. And today, we're going to do a softcore history, better off dad version of what's happening in that area. But on a serious note, as of this recording, we about a week ago, the terrorist group Hamas, which is mainly headquartered in what's called the Gaza Strip in Palestine, invaded, I don't know what other word to use, invaded Israel and killed over 1,000 civilians in the most brutal, awful way you can imagine. It's the kind of thing that you don't even want to think about happening, let alone to kids, babies, civilians, women, men, just trying to go about their lives. And if neither of us is Jewish, obviously, but if you happen to be Jewish, there's not much scarier. When you're in the world in general as a Jew, generally throughout history, and if you don't know the history, look into it. Throughout history, Jews haven't felt safe wherever they are because of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And so one of the ideas of the whole project of Israel was, like it or not like it or whatever you know about the history, one of the ideas and concepts was to have a place where they could feel safe, have their own country, and not be living in a country surrounded by people who hate them. Well, obviously, the history of Israel, modern times after World War II Israel, that they are surrounded by people who hate them, but they at least can have this little cocoon and at least feel like we can control this little cocoon and feel safe. So what Hamas has done is punctured that bubble, and no matter where you are as a Jew, right now it must feel unsafe. I can't imagine, but that's what I got to believe. And to our Jewish friends, we stand by you. We're on the side of you feeling safe, and we've got your back. In other words. Then there's also the Palestinian situation, which is, and I would say to our Palestinian friends, but we don't know of any Palestinian friends or even listeners that we have, but we have empathy. We can use our empathy to say the response to the terrorist attacks is causing a lot of Palestinian civilians to suffer. Babies, again, you guys have seen the videos. Babies, women, children, men are just being, slaughtered at the moment.
If you haven't seen the videos, don't.
Yeah. Take care of yourself. Take care of your own mental health by not gorging on those videos. If you need to look at a few just to get a feeling for what's going on, fine. But your brain doesn't, when it looks at a video, doesn't realize it's thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
So your brain and your body might have the same physiological reactions as if you were there, or it may think the danger is closer than it is. So be careful. Have empathy, connect to what's going on, but don't make it your whole day.
Yeah, that happened to me. I made that mistake in Ukraine. So don't do that.
Be careful. Take care of yourself. Take care of your kids. Take care. So just on the serious, to wrap up the serious portion. We're always serious. Are you kidding?
All seriousness aside.
And all seriousness aside. So we feel for the people of the Gaza Strip and West Bank and Palestine as well. They deserve also to feel safe and to be able to live their lives without violence like this. So we stand with the civilians. We stand with the innocent people just trying to live their lives. We stand with people trying to defend their safe way of life. And people have spent their entire lives studying this whole situation with Israel and Palestine and haven't figured out solutions, or at least if they figured out solutions, they haven't figured out a way to get those solutions implemented. So better off dad's not going to come with any solutions today. All right.
No.
We may have our opinions, we may have our thoughts, and we may have our things that we privately message each other. We're not putting those out there because the only thing I'm sure about is they're probably wrong and haven't been thought through enough because we're not experts, right?
Well, we tend to not think so much before we speak. It's actually our process for thinking. Is talking.
That's right. So there's what we talk to each other about, and there's what we'll put out there in the World Wide Webs, which used to kind of overlap during the Don't Panic days, but we learned our lesson. All right.
Know better, do better.
So it's one thing to sit there and go, all right, I'm no expert. I don't know. I'm not a historian. I'm not a Middle East expert. I'm not an Israel Palestine. I'm not even Jewish. I'm not even Palestinian. What do I know? Right. And then you're on the way to school. I'm on the way to dropping my daughter off at school. And one of the things I read was check in with your kids, right? Because they've got social media, maybe they're seeing stuff and they don't understand it, they don't know what's going on. So I was just kind of asking her what she's heard. And and she said, well, a lot of people are saying support Palestine. And she said, a lot of people are saying don't support Palestine. A lot of people are saying support Israel. And a lot of people are saying don't support Israel. And some of the people saying both things are liberal. Some of the people saying both things are not liberal. I don't really know I don't know everything that's going on over there. So I don't really know what to think. Right. And I was like, okay, well, she didn't open up with, I saw, a baby after a bombing, so that's
right.
I'm glad she's not seeing that stuff, but also she's just like, all the messages are conflicting and confusing.
She sounds like nice guy Eddie in Reservoir Dogs. I don't know who's shot. I don't know who's not. I don't know who has the diamonds.
Right. I don't know nothing about nothing. So she's just like, and I'm trying to keep this clean because maybe I'll show her this because I was going to do the Ruth quote. I don't know what that's about. F. Which was basically what she was saying. I don't know what that's about F. And so my next question was, okay, cool. Do you know the history of the area? Like the Israel-Palestine, do you know the history? And she says, well, not really. We haven't really covered that. And I was like, well, thanks again to the American education system. My child, who has had world history twice, once in middle school, once in high school, is now quarter of the way through U.S. history in high school, knows and don't know S about F about Israel Palestine.
And I'm sure they're a good student too, so it's not like they're not paying attention.
Right. I mean, if you asked what something about the Revolutionary War, the Boston Tea Party, or World War II in Europe, it's like, oh yeah, we studied that. I give you all the details about that. But Israel Palestine, I don't know. So here's the issue. We had 5 minutes left until we got to school. And I was like, my choices were don't say, okay, we'll talk about it later. Or the choice I actually made was, all right, I got 5 minutes to give you the history of Israel and Palestine up to present day. So I couldn't do my, we get there when we get there, right? I had to do what we used to call the Reader's Digest version.
That's right.
Completely abridged. And
your kid was never so glad to get to school.
Well, as you said earlier, she may have planned it that way.
Yeah, right.
She may have been
she's okay. Looking at her phone, going, all right, now. Hey, Dad.
And this can't be a 3-parter like you do on your little fun video with your friend. This has to be a 1-parter.
She's even checking the traffic. All right, let's see. There's no there's no traffic jam over here, so we should get to school on time.
So today, on a very special episode of Better Off Dad, Softcore History, you're going to get a reenactment of what I told my daughter. And I started it with the same caveats. Like, there aren't enough caveats. I need more caveats. I ran out of caveats. I ordered more on Amazon. They're on the way.
It's so expensive.
They're not. Again, Amazon's got deals, man. I get the Amazon brand caveats.
That's true.
Never get the great value caveats. The great value caveat sounds like, I'm not racist, but that's a great value caveat. So don't order caveats from wish.com.
That's a meme.
The caveats that I gave at the beginning of this, we're not historians. I'm no expert. I only know what I've heard, what I've read, and what I was able to look up online. What this is for really is those of you who are like the rest of us, who are like, I don't even know the history. Why are they fighting? I don't even know what's going on over there, right? This is going to give you that 5-10 minute, here's what's going on. I'm going to be leaving out a lot because there is a lot. There's a lot I don't know. There's also a lot of nuances and stuff that you can't cover in 5 or 10 minutes. And there are plenty of good historians, podcast videos out there if you really want to do a deep dive into this stuff.
And I'm sure you'll probably mention them as you go along. I mean, you do tend to, cite your sources. So
I do tend to do that, don't I?
If people want to, look into it a little deeper, they'll know where to go.
Yeah. Also, as we always say, if you have thoughts or questions, or you said this thing and that's just wrong, you know what to do.
That's right. And while you're down there, if you like what you've seen, if you like our show, maybe hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell icon so you don't miss a single video.
And without further ado, the Better Off Dad softcore history version. And in true Better Off Dad fashion, we're going all the way back to 1,400 years. I mean, this might be the farthest back we've gone. This is 14th century BC, means 1,400 years before the collapse of the Roman Republic and the founding of the Roman Empire. It also means before the biblical character of Christ, which I guess is appropriate to bring up here, because this is basically gives you an idea of what the area looked like at the time of all those stories we used to hear from the Old Testament. This is
the good old days.
The good old days.
When God had a sense of humor.
Make Mesopotamia great again. God. This, so to orient you guys a little bit, Mediterranean Sea, this is Africa down here, Egypt, the Nile, not just a river in Egypt. Greece,
that's right,
here. Roman Empire would have covered, Italy's like over here somewhere, and then the Roman Empire would have covered kind of around here and up there. So that gets you oriented a little bit, right?
Right.
Modern day Iraq, Iran, and this, general area. India's over here. So is everybody kind of oriented now as to where we are?
Yeah,
all right.
There'll be a test later.
Well, you can see Jerusalem is right here. So that gives you an idea. This must be Israel-Palestine area here. This must be Egypt here. And what you heard in the Bible was King Nebuchadnezzar, from a Babylon. Back in the day, the Assyria was the juggernaut. They were the world power, right? There were several world powers, Syria and the Hittites and the Babylonians were all world powers. They were always fighting, but Assyria was the main one with Nineveh here, right? And one of the kings, Nebuchadnezzar, liked to go around and kidnap people and turn them into slaves, and the Jews were no exception. So, or the Israelites or whatever they called them back then, right? Mainly people from Jerusalem. So then the Darius the First comes along, and this is how quickly we're moving through this. Darius the Great.
I'm gonna try to put a time clock on the video when I'm editing.
Nice. That'd be awesome. The first king of, not the first king of Persia, but he was the king of Persia who really broke out and took over a lot of what we now call the Middle East. And part of that was, and he's mentioned in the Bible, part of that was one of his techniques was whatever religion you had. What the Assyrians would do is they would capture your gods, which was basically embodied in your statues and stuff. They'd capture them, take them back to Assyria, take them back to Nineveh, and say, he's our God now, and you will worship our gods, right? What Darius did that was different is he said, whatever, I got a God, but you got a God, you can keep your God, right? So he said that to the Jews. He's like, you got a God, you can keep your religion. I'm not going to stamp it out. And hence, the Israelites survived and the Jews survived. Fast forward 2,800 years. So, okay, so the Jews survived to fight another day, right? When King Darius saves them, and lots of things happen, including crusades and things. The Christians are coming from the north, and they're fighting the Muslims from the south, and they're trying to retake Jerusalem, and the Jews are still there, right? But by the 1400s, the Turkish folks from the Turkey area, end up starting their own empire, and they name it after a famous piece of furniture, the Ottoman. So we have the Ottoman Empire that starts to expand. By this point in time, in the mid 1500s, they're kind of at the height of their power. And
if you're gonna name yourself after a piece of furniture, might as well make it something you put your feet up on.
Why not? So this is the Ottoman Empire. Keep in mind, there's Jerusalem down there, Israel. They've got part of Egypt. The Ottoman Empire was one of the, and we don't hear enough about the Ottoman Empire, right? They were the reason the Roman Empire finally fell in the 1400s. A lot of people think about the Roman Empire falling in the 600s, 400s, but that was the Western Roman Empire over here. The Eastern Roman Empire was still a thing until the mid 1400s, like not long before Columbus landed in the Caribbean islands in 1491. Not long before that, the Roman Empire still existed. We call them the Byzantines for whatever reason, but that was the Eastern Roman Empire that the Ottomans, once they took Constantinople, now the Ottomans are the big, the big game in town, right? So they grow and grow, and then the mid 1600s, they're still at the height of their power, but things like all empires, they're going through the cycle of empire, right? And then by 1914, they have shrunk, these light green areas, they maybe don't have as much control over, so they're starting to shrink. And by 1914, they're called the old man of Europe or the sick man of Europe. I've heard him called at various times. And they make the decision that'll just put the final nail in their coffin. We all know another famous thing that happened around 1914 AD was the start of the First World War, which at the time they didn't call the First World War. That'd be weird. They called it the Great War.
It's like they've already got one. It's a franchise. They've already got the sequel in the making.
That's right. So the Great War starts, and the Ottoman Empire decides to cast their lot in with the Germans and Italians. And, well, we all know that doesn't go well for them.
Yeah, and if you're a middle-aged white man, you know everything that happened from that point on.
That's true. This is the part where my daughter probably could have told me, like, oh, World War I, yeah, trenches, right? The World War I that started in 1919, right? No, honey, that's when the U.S. entered it. That's what I thought I said. But you see,
thank you, public education.
But you see, the Ottoman Empire still has, keep an eye on it, Jerusalem, Israel, Palestine, right? So at this
Mhm.
time, when you think in terms of whose country was it at this time, it was the Ottoman
Mhm.
Empires. The Ottoman Empire ruled
Right.
it from Turkey. They're not even Arab, they're Turkish people, not Arab people.
Mhm.
This was just an area where olives were grown and, people lived on the land and farmed olives. An olive
And
tree
God
takes
bless them
many
for it.
years, like 30 years before it even produces olives. So these trees are like passed down from generation to generation. But as far as like what was the fiscal relationship, they were renting the land from some friend of the crown who probably lived in, Istanbul. Um,
Mm.
so they didn't own the land, but your family probably lived there for 3, 4, 5 generations, farming the same
Yeah.
olive trees, farming the same land, whatever goat herds you got and all that stuff. You're paying rent. As long as you're paying rent, you may never see your landlord, because all that is like the prince or the king of the Ottoman Empire probably just said, "Hey, here's some. You own this land now," and what that basically means is you get to collect the taxes or you get to collect the rent
I
from the
mean,
people that
if
live
you're
there.
if you're renting though, the dream is to never see your landlord,
Yeah,
honestly.
right. Um, Yeah. So the concept of whose land is it? Well, I don't know. In my book, I'm like, well, probably the person that's been farming it for 5 generations, right?
Right, right.
All right. So that brings us up to um, now it's instead of big pictures, it's going to be this website. This is the BBC. I can put it in the notes in case people want to go
Okay.
explore some more. But I thought the BBC would be okay. It's not the best just because, like, if I had enough time, maybe Al Jazeera has something. But it's like the
Mm.
British are the ones who, like a lot of stories in this, kind of screwed this whole thing up from the beginning, right?
Now, is this the point though in your explanation when your kid just reaches over and takes a hold of the steering wheel for you because you're doing like this?
Fortunately, she has her learner's permit, and she was driving.
Oh my God. Hey, I forgot. I forget our kids are getting older.
Yes. The and by the way, the whole everything I've covered up to this point took me like 45 seconds in the car,
Yeah.
right? I'm taking way longer now than I took. Everybody's like, haven't we gotten to school by now? Seems like we're there. This picture on the left where it says Sykes-Picot Agreement, 1916. This is, it was still the Ottoman Empire. So officially, so let's see if we can get our bearings here. You've got Turkey up here, right? This is the Mediterranean Sea here,
Hmm.
right? You still got um, Egypt down here, Israel, Palestine down here's Jerusalem, right? So we got our bearings, Mediterranean Sea, Greece. What's the problem with this map? It says 1916. These countries didn't exist in 1916. Like Persia did, Syria did, Arabia kind of did, but this whole pink area, it's kind of like, doesn't the Ottoman Empire still own all that? It's 1916. The war ain't over yet. The war didn't end until
Right.
like 1920, right?
These are
1921.
projections.
Sykes-Picot Agreement was a secret agreement between the French, well, between the allies, we'll call them, the
Mm.
British, the French, the Russians, right? Got
Hmm.
together and made an agreement. When we win this war, and in 1916, by the way, it wasn't clear. This ain't World War II, whereby 1941, 1942, everybody knew who was going to win. It was just a matter of how many people were going to die before it was over.
Hmm.
World War I wasn't like that. The First World War, it was anybody's war at that point, right? In 1916, they go ahead and make this agreement. This when we win, this is how we're going to divvy everything up. France, you get this part of Syria. Great Britain will get this, which, by the way, look at that. It includes Jerusalem. We'll
Hmm.
leave this down here because that's just basically all desert anyway. Who wants that? And then we'll create this new country called Iraq. There's Baghdad. Look at that. That's where they probably came up with the name Iran. And they're like, we'll take a bunch of what's currently Persia and turn it into Iran. They made this agreement, and then they won the war. So they're like, hey, since we made this agreement, I guess it's time to make this actually happen, right? But the people who
Right.
live down here, who until 10 minutes ago, were subject to the Ottoman Empire and had agreements in place with, whatever the Ottoman Empire would let them do. They're kind of like, what do you mean this is yours? We live here. And they're like, yeah, but we just won a war against your empire, so now it's ours. And they're like, we disagree.
You're welcome.
So this is where you've heard of Lawrence of Arabia. He was a British officer who kind of went native, as they say. He was actually down here. He understood he understood the Arab concerns better than most, and fought against interests that were against the Arab people's interest, and just fought against power. I actually would like to learn a lot more about Lawrence of Arabia. Turns out he's a pretty interesting character.
The movie's pretty good.
Yeah. And the French fight a bunch up in Syria because, surprise, the Syrians would kind of like to, they believe the marketing material when Woodrow Wilson said, we believe people should, determine their own futures and rule themselves. They kind of believed that. And the French were like, no. But we'll talk more about the French and what they did after the wars in a future episode. But Southeast Asia, they try some of the same shenanigans. Anyway, so this whole area
didn't go so well.
After the First World War, there's this what's called British Mandate Palestine, where the British, through the League of Nations, which was the proto-UN, UN didn't exist yet, but through the League of Nations, they say, okay, Great Britain, you own all this, Transjordan, Iraq, Palestine, and France, you get all this up here, right? And you can keep it if you can fight for it, basically. So that's before 1947. Then we have the sequel to the First World War. We have World War II. And this is where it gets absolutely nuts, because World War II is where, again, this is the part of history you're taught, so you all know what happens in the Second World War. Well, first of all, it happens pre-World War II. The Jews in Eastern Europe and the Jews in most of Europe don't feel safe, especially in Eastern Europe, where there are, and this is pre-World War II stuff in Imperial Russia, and then in Eastern Europe, lots of what's called a pogrom. And a pogrom is basically government-sanctioned violence against a particular ethnic group, in this case, Jews, where they just run through the streets and shatter windows and pull people out of their homes and murder them. And the police just stand there and watch, right? And this goes on for centuries, but it gets really bad as the Jews are thinking, we're moving into the future, we're moving into modern times. I don't know if they called it that, but it's like things are the Renaissance, the age of reason, and as Jews, we still can't feel safe. We're still being blamed for all the world's problems. We're still being killed in our homes. And they start trying to think of a way that they can be safe somewhere. So they start looking around the world. Like, is there a place we could feel safe? And it wasn't the U.S., because the U.S., the propaganda doesn't say this, but the U.S. has been racist for a long time, right? It's been there are pockets
this might come as a surprise to some of you.
Yeah. And so, there was no exception with Jews. Jews couldn't feel safe necessarily in the U.S. because they would say, okay, it's better than Eastern Europe. There aren't pogroms happening in Brooklyn, right? But we still can't, it's not ours. We depend on someone else to keep us safe, right? And so there's a whole project, they call it the Zionist Project, right? To try to say, where can we go to feel safe? At one point, they're even talking about Madagascar. Like the Europeans are actually talking about, hey, we can clear out Madagascar, which is that little island off of Africa down there with the lemurs, and y'all can have that, right? And then finally somebody's like, well, if you know your history with, Nebuchadnezzar and Darius the Great and all those guys, we're from down here, right? And then, in fact, it's Jewish people still living there, like 10% or like somewhere 5 to 10% of the folks that live in this Palestine area are Jewish, ethnically, all the way back to Job, right? It's like, just imagine, you're like, my great 100 greats grandpa is Moses or whatever, right?
How many greats is that?
That's a lot. So they're like, well, maybe that's like our ancestral home, right? None of them have been there. None of them can trace any of their family there, but there are
Mhm.
Jewish people there, and like the Bible, it's kind of like our ancestral home. So some of them start moving there, right? Even before World War II, to get away from the violence and things. Then World War II happens, and it goes to 11, right? Of course, we all know the Holocaust, 6.5 million Jews are killed just for being Jewish. Obviously, also homosexuals and Catholics and Romani people, but by far it's Jewish people who are targeted and killed, and not just from Eastern Europe, where they're used to be having violence, but the violence gets ratcheted up even in Eastern Europe. It's worse. But as Germany rolls across France, even in Western Europe, you can't be safe. So you'd be like, hey, man, just move to Western Europe. You'll be fine. And then Germany invades. It's like, we can't, again, when we rely on others to be safe, we aren't really safe. So the Zionist project gets ramped up tremendously, and millions, hundreds of thousands of European Jews and Jews from all over the world, there's like a call, like move to Palestine. We're going to set up shop there, right? And then after World War II, it's a combination of, you know, the world's like this awful thing that happened to the Jews, and there's a lot of violence happening in, because obviously there are already people living there, by the way, in Palestine, and they've been farming these olive trees forever. And when the Jewish people from Europe show up, they start buying land from whoever used to own it, which was probably some rich guy in Istanbul, right? And he's like, yeah, fine, I don't care. I'll take money now because I don't know if I'll be able to collect rent in the future with this whole war thing, the Ottoman Empire collapsing. I don't know if I'll be able to continue collecting my rent. So yeah, if you're offering money now, sure, you can buy it. And so Jewish folks bought a lot of these olive farms, right? And went to the people who were farming it and said, hey, we own this now, and we don't need you to. And by the way, the Palestinian olive farmers are like, oh, cool, whatever, just put a different name on the check, right? Where do I need to send the check now? You're the new owner, right? And they're like, no, you don't understand. We don't want to farm olives. Well, you don't have to. I'll do it. No. We don't want you farming olives either. We want the land, not the olive trees.
Sure.
And so they kicked them off the farms and cut down the olive trees and started building villages and cities and stuff like that, right? This is the part where I should reiterate, I'm not a historian. I don't know all the details. There are lots of places you can go. I'll actually put a link to one of the podcasts I listened to that also cites his sources. So he's read tons of books on this stuff. So I'll put that in the notes as well. This is where you can get some of the details of the buying up olive farms and, you know, kicking the Palestinians off. But
we're doing pretty broad strokes here today.
Really
kids.
broad strokes. The British try to bring some sort of harmony during this period, even before World War II. And they're saying, okay, y'all need to live together, right? And as the British, we're going to do what the British normally do, which is we're going to bring peace by pitting people against each other, right? That's how that's how we can. And at various times, we'll put the Arabs in charge, or we'll put the Jews in charge, and then they'll control the other one, and then we just have to come in and tamp things down once in a while. So the British are getting terrorized by the Jews. The Zionists are blowing up British stuff. The Arabs are blowing up British stuff. The British are killing everybody, and things are it's mayhem, right? Because the Palestinians are like, this was our land, and the Jews are like, well, we're taking it now, and the British are like, y'all get along. And finally the British are like, okay, after World War II, they're like, screw it. United Nations, what do you want to do with this mess, right? Yeah. The mess we created. Great Britain created a mess. What do you want to do about it? Because we're leaving. We're not sticking around, right? So what they do is...
And we did all we could.
We did all we could, which was make it horrible. It's kind of like the colonizers did to Africa, right? They went in, messed everything up, pitted everybody against each other, left, and said, see, y'all can't take care of yourselves.
Yeah, something a trend here.
Yeah. That's why a lot of times you'll hear the Israel-Palestine situation framed in a colonial frame, sort
Yeah.
of a colonial backdrop.
Yeah.
So anyway, what happens after World War II is they say, okay, the Arabs get these areas, the Jews get these areas, and we'll make Jerusalem an international city. So the UN says that. The Arabs never agree to it. The US gets the UN to vote on it and to agree to it. And the Arabs are like, no, we're not doing that. And Israel says, fine, we'll just declare all of our areas, all of our little striped areas to be Israel. So since the Arabs don't want to agree to what the UN said, we'll be Israel, and that's that. And you got to stay out. Well, the Arabs disagreed with that and immediately attacked Israel, because the thought was, with all of these Arab states around here, Jordan, Egypt, Syria to the north, we can just take over Israel, make them stop being mean to the Palestinians, right? Well, Israel was better armed and better prepared for that invasion than everybody thought, and ended up fighting back the invasion. And that's where you end up with this little strip of land down here called Gaza, because there were still a lot of Palestinians, as you can see in these orange areas, but they all had to run when Israel attacked. When the Arab states attacked and then Israel fought back, they kind of pushed the Arab civilians into this little strip called Gaza and this little area up here called the West Bank. So that brings us up to what they call the armistice line. So horrible war, and they decided that Egypt would control the Gaza Strip, Jordan would control the West Bank, and Israel would have Israel. Because it's like, you want it, come and take it. Well, they tried to come and take it, they couldn't. So in 1967, a year or two before your gracious hosts were born, so before that, of course, the East Jerusalem was ruled by Jordan, and West Jerusalem by Israel, and the Gaza Strip by Egypt. Well, then, if you're not familiar with the Suez Canal, it's the one where that ship got turned sideways a year or two ago. Remember that ship that barge got turned sideways, and suddenly you couldn't buy wood at Home Depot?
Yeah, that's what they're saying. That was what caused that.
Yeah. You had the COVID back orders, and then you had the Suez Canal getting blocked back orders. So
Man,
you've got
that wood was so piled up. It's unbelievable. But anyway, I digress.
Anyway, before the ship got turned sideways, there was this really important canal, right? And it makes it so you don't have to go around Africa to get places. Like the Panama Canal makes it so you don't have to go around South America. Suez Canal makes it so you don't have to go around Africa to get to like India and China and all those places, right?
They're like the toll roads of the oceans.
He who controls the Suez Canal controls trade, basically, with Europe, between Europe and the East.
He who controls a lot of stuff.
So Egypt starts getting a little froggy with the Suez Canal, and that's harmful to Israel, right? Because Israel's like, well, hang on, we would like to trade with the East too, so that's not good for us. So Israel decides, we're not putting up with this, we're going to attack Egypt. So they attack the Sinai Peninsula in what is known as the 6-Day War. I don't remember how long it lasted, but they end up, Israel maybe this was part of their tremendous air force, just ends up rolling over Egypt, pushes them all the way back across the Sinai Peninsula. And now they also take the West Bank from Jordan, and they take what's called the Golan Heights up here from Syria. So it took them, I don't know how long, but it was during the 6-Day War. to take all of this land up here. All right, so when people talk about land for peace, we've heard land for peace. Like Israel says, we'll make a peace deal with you, and we'll give you some land back if you help control the terrorism. You don't attack us again. They're talking about giving land back that Israel took in that 1967 war, giving the West Bank, the Sinai Peninsula, etc. So now these maps are too confusing. Let's just say that before the war you have this situation, after the war you have this situation where they have taken some of the West Bank. All right. Just want to see if there's any more. You guys are getting this live now, right? So let's just leave it at this. Let's just say that since 1967, and then again in 1973, there was another flare up, and then this is the part where we compress the timeline between the late 60s, early 70s, and now. And this would be where you would need an expert on Israeli-Palestine relations and Middle East policy, right? Because I don't know S about F when it comes to that stuff, other than to say this: when you hear West Bank, when you hear Gaza, when you hear Jerusalem, this is what we're talking about. The reason Jerusalem is so contentious is, according to the agreements, part of it's supposed to be governed by the Arabs, the Palestinians, and part of it's supposed to be governed by Israel. Well, Israel wants to make it their capital, and the Arabs are going, wait, if you make it your capital, where does that leave us? And Israel's kind of like, we don't care where that leaves you. It's going to be our capital, right? So this West Bank and Gaza has been the bane of the existence. Through peace deals and other things, Israel has opened up this border here so that Egypt controls this border with oversight from the UN and Europe and everything, to try to make sure that weapons and stuff don't flow into Gaza from this direction. Israel controls the entire border around Gaza, including the sea, air, and land, except for this one crossing into Egypt. And they also control entry and exit into the West Bank. What I'm not sure about, because I didn't look this up, I don't know about the part of the West Bank that borders on Jordan. I'm not exactly sure if Israel has control of that border. I believe they do. But don't quote me on that. We'd have to ask an expert.
Oh, yeah, we are not, nor do we profess to be.
Which we are totally not experts. So that brings us to why is this so difficult? Well, the Palestinians believe that they are being oppressed, and they have plenty of evidence for that, because Israel still governs the West Bank. Israelis have built settlements within the West Bank, and then troops have to come protect those settlements. So that means more Israeli troops. That means more oppression of the Palestinian people within the West Bank. Gaza, up until 2005, Israel did the same thing. They governed the Gaza Strip, which meant they were occupying it, which meant oppression of Palestinian people. And the reason for that is, when they weren't doing that, terrorists were able to build capabilities and do training and go into Israel proper and commit terrorist acts. And Israel said, well, in order to feel safe, here's what we got to do. We got to occupy Gaza. We got to occupy the West Bank. And then whenever you occupy another, when it's an occupation equals violence, because you can't, the British learned this. They're the best at it. The Israelis learned it from the British. It takes violence to occupy a group of people against their will. Period. It just takes violence to do that. And Israel sees this as their way of feeling safe, right? And for a long time it worked. Right. And then after a couple of uprisings in Gaza, in the West Bank, and after, it's important to say, like, well, who is Hamas? Well, Hamas was a terrorist organization that did a lot of the stuff in Israel and a lot of the terrorism and stuff. And then when Israel said, okay, we'll pull out of Gaza, and then Gaza, you can have elections and decide who's going to run Gaza. They elected Hamas. Hamas is like, oh, well, if we're going to have elections, we're going to make a political party. And so they made a political party. And by the way, this is kind of what Sinn Féin was. They were the political arm of the IRA up in Ireland, right? And Sinn Féin said, well, if you're going to have elections, or the IRA said, if you're going to have elections, we're going to have political people. And we'll call them something different. Maybe that's what Hamas should have done. They should have been like, well, we'll have politicians, but we'll give them we'll call them something different. Problem with Hamas winning is Hamas's charter says we must destroy Israel and kill all Jews. It doesn't say we need to figure out a way to live in peace with these people who, even though they came here uninvited, they're here now. And we got to deal with the fact that they're here now. We can't just keep saying y'all shouldn't have came here back in, before World War II and after World War II. It's like, well, they're here now. So you got to deal with the fact that they're here. And Hamas is like, nope, we'll just kill them all, right? They take over Gaza. Israel feels like they can keep them contained. But then, as of this recording, about a week or two ago, October 7th was the date, 2023, Hamas breaks out, kills over 1,000 Jews. And now Israel says, well, this thing we've been trying since 2005 ain't working anymore. We got to go back and occupy Gaza because that's the only thing that works.
This is the point where you look over at the speedometer and she's going about 5 miles over the speed limit because she's like wanting to get the story wrapped up.
Yes. She's like, we're sitting in front of the school. And
Dad, get out of my classroom.
Yeah, I followed her in.
You're like up at the board.
But you see, and then Israel, the only way they can feel safe is she's like, what? That's the situation now, and I don't have any answers. But I try to pay attention. But take care of yourself as your dad, as your YouTube dad, as your better off
That's
dad.
right.
Practice self-care. But what do we know? We're just better off dad, trying to do the right thing when things are hard. But it shouldn't be this hard.
By
There's
the
also
way,
yeah.
There's a great documentary on the rise of the Israeli Air Force because without air support, Israel is pretty well boned. And the way this Air Force got put together is about as outlaw as you're going to get. So if you want add a little bit to this, go check out the history of the Israeli Air Force. There's a great they were interviewing the pilots, and these are old Jewish Americans who were basically what do they call that when you expatriated? And this dude was talking about how he goes, here I am, this little Jewish guy from Queens, defending the homeland in a Messerschmitt. He's like, don't think the irony wasn't lost on me.
Right.
It was lost on me.